Greetings, everyone, and thank you for coming together to take time to reflect and to pray about the pastoral letter which I put out just a little while ago. The letter which I wrote and sent to everyone is centered around a question, and it's the question that St. Peter asked Jesus, and he asked the Lord, where are you going? I think that question is one that surfaces for me. It comes into my heart and mind, and I think it's a question that all of us probably need to ask ourselves at this time. And Jesus gives an answer. His answer is, I'm going back to the heart of the city. I'm going back to where the church is and to where the challenge is. And we need to now consider what that means for us. During this season of Lent, as we journey with the Lord towards Jerusalem and to the cross, I'm asking you to reflect together, to pray about what the Lord is asking of you, and to see how you can bring about the kind of action that your parish needs to be renewed. We've prepared a series of videos. I converse with Father James Mallon, with Sister Nuala Kenny, and with Dr. David Dean about the three areas that we've identified as focal points for our attention and action. I invite you to consider those points, and may these instruments that we're preparing help you to stimulate your own conversations and your own prayer and reflection. And may this time spent on the pastoral letter bring about the renewal not only of you personally, but of all of you collectively in your parishes. Our first conversation is with Father James Mallon. Father James is the pastor of St. Benedict Parish. He has had extensive experience in working with the new evangelization in his parish, but he's also had experience internationally and nationally with his association in Alpha, which is an approach to presenting the gospel to people who are seeking perhaps to know more about Jesus, to help those who might have forgotten who Jesus is, and to begin again. He's also written a book on how to renew a parish, and it's called Divine Renovation. So I guess you'll compete with Homes on Homes with this book. Our conversation is about mission, because it's the first area that we've identified in the pastoral letter requiring attention. In our conversation, we're going to talk about the importance of mission and how this has been changed and needs to be changed in our way of understanding what mission means for us as Catholics. Our mission is not anymore to go away and to go to other worlds and to other countries, but it's about going out to those who are right around us in our families and in our neighborhoods and in our parishes. And so we're going to hopefully help you to consider how you might adjust your thinking and how to become missionary disciples in your parish. Hello, everyone. I'm joined here in my library by Father James Mallon, who has kindly accepted to come to share some thoughts and reflections on our pastoral planning based on the letter that I put out just a few days ago. And we're going to talk a little bit about the first component of that letter, which is on the mission of the church. The other day, I was told that Pope Francis tweeted a message, and the message was that the primary mission of the church is evangelization. And I was struck by, firstly, the fact that the Pope agrees with me, and but secondly, that he used this very modern means of communication. A tweet has to be the shortest way of putting the message across. And I was wondering, you're familiar with all this stuff, what you thought about the message and about the means for putting that message across.
Well, as another famous Canadian once said, that the medium is the message, and Twitter or social media is a way of going out. And by the very act of engaging those media, we find there an expression of what mission is. Mission essentially means to go. And the question for us in our churches is, are we equipped to go, or are we all about staying? Yeah. So often in the life of our parishes, we seem to be quite content with staying in and keeping it to ourselves, and celebrating liturgies and having worship and doing things within the four walls of our church. So I think even before the question of what ought we do when we go on mission, I think the very fact that the Pope is talking about mission is hugely significant. The fact that you're raising the awareness of mission, that the point of the church is not to sit in church, it's to go out. It's to go out. And as Pope Francis has said over and over again, I want a church that goes out. He says, I want a church that goes out.
Well, that's what we do every time we finish Mass. What we're telling people is, go. It's because seeds here and do your stuff.
But that's the thing, is like, I wonder if it's just become a rote formula. Like I said to folks at Mass a couple of days ago, we really mean this. Like, we're really serious when you say, go out and proclaim the gospel of the Lord, because the very word Mass, missa, comes from the mission. Think of missa and missile. I always say to people, you're being sent out to do something, and the sending forth is what gives the Mass its very name. And so we come together, we worship God, we're fed from the Word of God and from the Eucharist. Why? So we can go forth and be the body of Christ in the world.
Well, now you're in a parish, and you're trying to make this happen. How do you present to your parishioners this new understanding of mission? It's very well to say that we're being sent, that we have to go, we got to get out of our sacristies, as Pope Francis says. But how do you get this shift in thinking received by the parishioners that you're working with?
Through patience, impatience, through time, through repetition. Really, what we're talking about is transforming the culture of our churches. And by say culture, I don't mean the ethnicity or anything. I mean all the things that we take for granted, the things that we consider to be normal. And many of the things that the church, the leadership of our church is calling us to, are those things that for decades many Catholics have thought that are not really normal. Those are maybe those odd people do those things, that the 2 or 5 or 10% of certain Catholics will get involved in those things, but normal Catholics don't do those things. So it's really about redefining what is normal. And I think before we can talk at any time about what we ought to do, we need to go back and ask the question, who are we? Because even if you look at the scriptures, all the major moments in Jesus' life, his baptism in the Jordan, the transfiguration, before he made these decisive steps into his public ministry or to turn his face towards Jerusalem, he had those deep encounters with the Father, who said, "You're my beloved Son, and I'm well pleased in you." He had this identity affirmed before he began to act. And I think if we're confused about what we ought to do, it's because we're confused about who we are.
And that's really a very important point. As I'm listening to you, this conversation that we're having, I'm hoping will be the occasion to stimulate other people in our parishes to have similar conversations. That's why we're doing what we're doing here today. Yes. And this particular conversation on mission is planned to take place sometime in Lent, probably on the 3rd Sunday of Lent. And the gospel of that day is Jesus's encounter with the woman.
And what did she
well.
say? Come and met a man who told me who I was.
She went out on mission.
And it began with her finding out who she was. Here's
Yes.
a man who told me everything about me. He told me about myself. And so her identity is affirmed as well. And then she goes and she speaks out of her personal experience of her encounter with Jesus and brings others. She goes on mission. It's the question of mission, you know, at the heart of identity then is, you know, as a church we have to say, well, what is our essential identity? And it is, I think, not just to have mission as a component. I think it is to simply be missional. That's the original meaning of apostolic, of course. When we say one Holy Catholic and Apostolic Church, it has the meaning of, the successors of the apostles and the bishops, but primarily biblically, it means we're a missionary church. We are essentially missionary, which means there's a difference between a church and a club.
Well, I'm glad that there is a difference, because sometimes in some of our parishes, I'm not sure if we're dealing with a church or a club. And some of the difficulties that I'm encountering as bishop, and some of the resistances that I'm getting from people in different places,
Absolutely.
It's almost because what I'm suggesting in our pastoral letter goes against their club mentality.
Absolutely.
You belong or you don't belong because you play cards. I think you wrote something about that. You know, we're not a club. We're not a club. We're disciples who have been entrusted with something important and significant to share with others.
Someone once said that the church is the only organization that primarily exists for the sake of those who do not belong. Now, the question for us is, do we really believe that? Because often what is communicated to those in leadership, pastors, especially if you try to ever leave the 99 for the sake of the one, is that the 99 get rather upset. And their message to us as leaders is, well, what about us? We're paying your wage. You're here to serve us. You are here to meet my needs. And I remember having that conversation a while back with someone, and perhaps I responded a bit with perhaps less patience than I should have. It wasn't really that person, it was more the concept that I was reacting to. And I said, no, I'm not. Part of what I do is to meet the spiritual needs of my parishioners. But my job is to lead the members of our parish to go out and change the world. That's our job. What you're describing is a club. And so I think the club mentality can even exist in parishes that do a lot of activities. So if even parishes that do things related to discipleship and faith formation can still have the club mentality, because if the primary question is serving our members, then you're a club. I always say to some of our ministries, how can your ministry, whatever it is, be attuned to encountering and engaging people who are not members of our church?
And Pope Francis said some of what you're saying in language that's we're beginning to get used to the uniqueness of his style. When he was referring to a church where he wants the pastors and the leadership of the communities to go out and actually interact with the sheep and to take on the smell of the sheep. Because they're out there. They're not necessarily the nice ones that you've kept for show purposes on the inside. So the thrust of this missionary call in this pastoral letter, it's about changing and shifting our self-understanding. It's about changing the way we think.
That's right.
And putting into practice some things that none of us as Catholics may have even ever imagined doing. So here we are, you're talking to a grandparent or a mother or a father. Maybe you're talking to someone whose family is not perfect. The family's experienced a conflict or divorce or whatever. And we're telling these people, you've got to go out and share what you've experienced of the grace of God. Because what you've experienced of the grace of God, that's the gospel.
That can be a very scary thing for people, because even people who have a desire to do that. I mean, I think if people have authentically experienced Jesus, there's a desire. Now, even in the presence of a real desire, people still might not do it because they're afraid or they don't know how. They don't know the best way to do it. Sometimes part of the problem is there's no desire to share that with others, and that may be because a person hasn't yet fully come to that personal encounter with Jesus that Pope Francis speaks a lot about, because an encounter is one thing, which an encounter needs to lead to a relationship, and a relationship eventually, think of any married couple. They had someone probably prepare the way for the introduction. We would call that perhaps pre-evangelization. Then there's a personal encounter with someone, your first date. Then you develop a personal relationship. But you only got married not because you had an encounter in a relationship, but because someone eventually said, will you marry me? And you had to weigh that decision and make a decision. And Jesus talked about that in his ministry, and he talked about the man who builds the tower and the man who sets out with his army against a bigger army. He says, weigh your decision. If you're going to be my disciple, make sure you know what you're doing and make that decision. And so that is a process that takes time through investing in a relationship. So when we talk about doing this kind of thing, we're not really talking about, someone standing on a street corner, preaching or giving a testimony. Yeah. We're really talking about starting on a human foundation. That I think of the words of St. Peter, 1 Peter 3:15, I think it is, who says, always have the answer ready for those who ask the reason for your hope, but give it with humility and gentleness. And I think if we as Christians and as a community, as a church, if we can live our faith in a provocative way, and people say, well, why are you like this? Why do you do this? Then we say, okay, now I can tell you it's about Jesus. And this is how Jesus has impacted my life.
To be able to have a provocative impact on anybody, it presupposes that you're actually different from whatever it is that's going on around you.
I think back to something you actually said a few weeks ago at the meeting of parishes, and I actually tweeted it. You basically said the church has not been as fecund as we could have been. We haven't had as many spiritual babies. And you said, if we want to have spiritual babies, we've got to start practicing safe religion. I think that was absolutely fantastic. Because it's true, isn't it? That when the biggest temptation of the church throughout the centuries is to make it safe.
And to relegate it to the realm of the private, because that's where it's the safest of all, isn't it? If I can be Catholic all by myself, sitting in my room, saying my prayers, that's about the safest place you can be. Pope Francis is saying go out to the peripheries. I mean, the peripheries of Halifax are downtown here, and at night you don't want to go out there too often on your own. You need maybe to be accompanied occasionally, because to go out and to be with those who need perhaps to hear the message that there are some options to this living that we are doing, you have to be able to go out and to be provocative. We have to be different. I remember a few months back, some of the CCO young people did something on Spring Garden Road in the middle of the night. They were trying to get some of the people who were going into the bars on Friday night to drop into the church. It worked. It was so interesting for some of these people that were walking by that they actually came in, and they invited them to light a candle. They invited them to say a prayer for anybody that was it. But what kind of an impression did it have on people to have had that happen? Yeah,
this is the mystery of God's grace. I think of the words of Paul, who said, I planted, or maybe Apollo planted, but someone planted and someone watered and someone will reap the fruit. Or when Jesus said in John 4, the story of the woman at the well, that you're going to reap a harvest that you haven't planted, someone else did. And we need to keep that in mind, that even though we might not see the fruit being harvested, because if you think ultimately, Jesus said, go and make disciples. And so the ultimate end game of evangelization is to make disciples. That's the person who is maturing and learning and has that thirst and hunger to do so. We might never see the end game with a person we work with, but we might be the person who has prepared the soil, done the pre-evangelization. We may have planted the seeds. It's God that gives the growth, or we may have watered. But there's a mystery of God's grace at work, and there are many different aspects to evangelization. I think in the end, however, you can't replace relationships in time.
Yeah, it's because seeds require time to grow.
Absolutely.
And so when I think of the people in our parishes who are trying to figure out how are we going to make this pastoral letter work, that certainly is an important message. To take the time.
Yeah.
Take the time to become familiar with the vocabulary, with the words that we're using. Because sometimes I have the feeling that we use words that people don't understand, right?
I think that often happens. We often use the same words but have very different meanings. And we often find ourselves spinning wheels. I think we've all had that experience where 2-3 minutes into a conversation, you're thinking, wait a minute, this something isn't connecting here.
I refer to it in the letter a number of times that the mission is to make disciples, to become missionary disciples.
Yes.
But those words, for most of our Catholic population, certainly those who have grown up Catholic, to be missionary meant to go off to Africa.
Right. That's right. But we had a clericalized understanding of the baptismal vocation, and this is one of our struggles, is we have to overcome a clericalism that's been in the heart of the Church for centuries and centuries. And that was the central insight of Second Vatican Council, I think, was to try to break that and get us back to an earlier understanding of the universal call to mission, the universal call to holiness, which is rooted in baptism and not in this. And I think sometimes the clergy have, almost in a sense, have appropriated what is proper to the baptized. You know, so that in our Catholic mind, if you're going to be that religious, you got to become a priest or nun, because normal Catholics just don't live that way. So what we're actually looking at doing is, people will often say to me they're a bit suspicious, but what's all these new ideas? And I say, no, I'm a very traditional Catholic. I'm a very traditional Catholic. We're going back to the New Testament here.
Yes, yes, and then and that's where the mind shift. You referred to cultural cultural Catholicism.
Yes.
Well, that's gone. Cultural Catholicism is gone. Catholic schools, Catholic universities, whatever, you know, the village where 99.9% of the population is Catholic and everybody does what's expected because that's the way it is. Well, all that's gone. Christendom is dead.
Yes.
And so what we've got now is a challenge to be present in this world with our faith. And the way to be there is to be authentic and to actually have faith. To be a baptized Catholic doesn't stop 10 minutes after you've had the water poured all over you.
Yeah.
It's what you're going to do with the rest of your life. That part needs to be reaffirmed for many of us.
I think, too, we also reaffirm the significance and potential of the local church, of the parish. And Pope Francis did this in Evangelii Gaudium. He said, the parish is flexible. The parish is not outdated as long as it is able to adapt. And he also says in that great work that his dream is like his vision statement. He says, I dream of a missionary impulse that will transform everything, our schedules, our language, our vocabulary, not for the sake of, so that the church may live not for her own self-preservation, but for the sake of mission. And so I'd like, as we wrap up this conversation, a few questions that might be helpful for people to look at. One is a question that has haunted me over the years, that, you know, if my parish was to close next week, would anyone in the community who doesn't go to it miss us?
That's a good question.
Because that will tell you whether you're a missional church or whether you're just self-serving or self-referential, as Pope Francis says. The other question is, taking the lead from the question you led off with in your letter, Lord, where are you going? The question that Peter asks the Lord from that famous story, Quo Vadis. But we ask ourselves in the parish, where are we going? Parishioners should ask their parish priest, where are we going? Parish priests should ask the parishioners, do you know where we're going? Because if the priest thinks they're going somewhere and the parishioners don't, then obviously there's a breakdown in communication. And so even the whole concept of actually going somewhere is a hint of whether you're missional or not, because to be missional means we have to go. It's not just about individual believers going out from the church. It means that the church itself, the community, has to move to a different place. So this whole idea of strategic plans, it sounds very almost business-like, but we are a human organization. We're made up of human beings. We're not just a human organization, but we forget that grace builds on nature. Grace builds on nature. So we need to have the human things together. So where are we going? And do we really embrace that fundamental identity of being missional, or is it just an option out there that we might eventually someday get to? Are we really truly missional? Does it pervade? Does it invade everything that we do?
And I'm glad that you made those practical points, because the whole point of doing these conversations is to help people come to an awareness that they need to do some planning,
yes,
to identify some very specific actions, and what are those actions going to be in your parish in the next year. I mean, that's as blunt as I can make it, because it's, you know, action that drives, that ends up expressing what mission is all about.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much for the conversation. It's been great.
It's been my pleasure.
Dear friends, our first conversation is taking place in the third week of Lent. And the gospel text for the third Sunday of Lent was the encounter of Jesus with the Samaritan woman at the well. This particular gospel story is very appropriate for us who are considering the transformation of our understanding of mission in our church. What's interesting about this gospel, firstly for me, is that it's an encounter. It's an encounter between Jesus and a woman, a Samaritan woman, someone who would not have been on a good Jewish person's radar in terms of who to have a conversation with. But here Jesus meets with her, and in that encounter, something amazing happens. The conversation appears to be about sharing a glass of water, but in fact, it's about the transformation of the person's self-understanding. It's the way she sees herself, how her encounter with the Lord brings about a totally new awareness of who she is and what she's all about. From the encounter, which is a spontaneous one, Jesus and the woman get to know each other at another level. And so the Samaritan woman is taken up by the fact that here's this person who knows all about her. So from encounter to relationship, that passage is a necessary one if we're going to become disciples and later become apostles. We go from a first encounter to a knowing of one another, getting, just like in the friendship. You meet someone, you get to know someone, you grow in that relationship, and as a result of it, something new comes of it, which is the going out to others. And that's where the element of mission comes in. We encounter the Lord, that impacts each one of us personally, and because it does, it turns us into not only disciples, but apostles who are asked to go out and share the good news that has been received. I invite you to give further thought to this gospel and ask yourself how reaching out to others becomes an important part of our pastoral plan. Who is it that you would like to bring to the Lord? Or more importantly, who is it that you would like to bring the Lord so that others might see in him the person that you see in Jesus Christ? Thank you very much.